Hi, I'm Donna Fiquera from Elite Edge Consulting. Today I'd like to share with you a taste of one of my favourite programs, Tapping into Your Inner Genius. This program will provide you with a strategy and techniques for reaching all those goals and dreams that you aspire to. So before we get started, I want you to close your eyes for a moment. I want you to picture what your ideal life might look like. What are you doing? What value are you adding? Who are you with and where are you living? What would this mean to you and how do you feel? Okay, so open your eyes again. We all deserve to reach our dreams and goals, but the truth is that on average only 3% of people ever do. And there's a number of reasons why this might be the case, and a big reason being that often our thoughts, beliefs and attitudes are not congruent with what we're trying to achieve in the first place. So what that means is that we can and often do self-sabotage our success because of what's going on in our mind. Another way of looking at this is that we can use our mind to improve our performance and success. It's absolutely in our power, and that's what I want to share with you in this presentation. So I'll introduce you to some of the neuroscience theory that underpins human behaviour and then show you a simple process that will help get you unstuck and moving towards those dreams. If you'd like a more detailed explanation for how you can work through this process, I'll provide you with some instructions at the end of the presentation so that you can get these for free. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, I want to take you through a simple exercise. I'm going to show you 3 images. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? So here we have a man counting money. What do you think of? Wealth, freedom, holidays and toys, a husband counting out his wife's allowance, banks, corruption, maybe the root of all evil. Here we have a crowd of people. What's the first thing that pops into your mind? A crowded sporting event, a crowded subway, a busy street, a sense of claustrophobia. One of my clients saw this picture and said it reminded her of end-of-year sales at David Jones. And finally, what about this image of a diver and a shark? What do you think of? Craziness? Danger? Death? Fear? Maybe adrenaline and adventure? Someone pursuing their passion? Freedom? Maybe this is on your bucket list. So when I run this exercise in my workshops, there are always a number of different responses that people give me. So why is it that one picture can be interpreted in so many different ways? So as humans, we tend to perceive things differently. We see the world through totally different lenses. These lenses and filters are shaped by our different experiences, how we were brought up, our education, our ethnic and cultural background, our environment, and our philosophy on life. These aspects all affect the way in which we see and interpret the world and the events that happen to us. But how is this so? Well, it's all got to do with the way our brain is wired. Let's explore that in a little bit more detail. In the last 10 years, the field of neuroscience has been achieving great breakthroughs in helping us understand how our brain works. This has largely occurred with evolving technology and in particular because of functional MRIs, which give us real-time images of what the brain's doing. We now know the brain is made up of billions of neurons or nerve cells. Neurons connect with other neurons through synapses to form chains of neurons or neural pathways. These connections are shaped by our experiences and through our process of thinking. These neural nets act as personal filters, creating various mindsets through which we see our version of the world. That's right, we don't see the world as it really is, but we see it according to how our brain is wired. It's a distorted version of reality. It's essentially the story that we tell ourselves about the world. So our mindsets include our assumptions, our attitudes and disposition, our inclinations or habits that all predetermine how we respond to and interpret different situations. That's why 2 people can look at any situation and read them as completely different, simply because their brains are wired differently. The more we engage in habitual types of thinking, the stronger the neural pathways get and the more entrenched our conditioning becomes. The same goes for habits of behaviour. The more we engage in certain behaviour, the more energy we give to certain neural pathways, and the more that behaviour becomes embedded, it becomes habitual. So what does this mean in terms of us reaching our full potential? Well, if our patterns of thinking shape our mindsets, and our mindsets create a potentially distorted version of the world, then if we're experiencing a situation that's causing us pain or discomfort, then perhaps it's our distorted version of the world and our distorted interpretation that's actually causing the pain. And if our thinking shapes our mindset, then maybe it's in our power to change our world simply through changing our thoughts. Now, for those of you who are interested in the science behind this, I really encourage you to research quantum physics. It's a very interesting field. But for now, I'm going to take you through a simple process. So I'm going to talk you through how our mindsets can impact our life. So we've already seen that habitual ways of thinking can create mindsets. These mindsets, our attitudes, beliefs, and assumptions about different parts of our life are all going to impact our emotions, thanks to a heap of chemicals and hormones that get released into our body. Now, I'm sure that you'd agree that our emotional state also has a big impact on our actions and our behaviour, and that in turn will determine the type of results that we get in life. So let me talk you through an example. Let's just say that I have a mindset that weekends are all about fun. Now, it's Friday afternoon, I'm heading into the weekend. Chances are I'm going to have a positive headspace and feel quite energised about the fun time that's to be had before me. If I've got some tasks or chores to do, I'll probably attack them with gusto because, again, I'm looking forward to the things that lie on the other side. And then come Sunday afternoon, as I reflect on the weekend that's been, I would have noticed perhaps that I've got heaps of things done and I've ended up having a great time with lots of positive energy. Now, if we look at the alternative mindset, we go into a weekend thinking, you know what, weekends are all about hard work. I've got so many chores and tasks to catch up on. I'll probably approach the weekend with a feeling of dread and a heavy heart. Now, the behaviour I engage in is probably going to be one where I procrastinate, putting off the inevitable. And come Sunday afternoon, I'll have realised I've wasted heaps of time through my procrastination and I've ended up having a boring weekend because I haven't really committed to anything. So you can see in both of these instances, our thoughts have really determined the outcome that we get. So this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, I love this model because if at any stage I feel like I'm not tracking towards my goals and my dreams the way I'd like to be, then I just do a reverse engineering process where I look at each of these stages and try to identify where the issue's occurring. So I'll look at my behaviour. Is there something I have or haven't done that's contributing to my outcome? I'll check in with my emotional state. How am I feeling? Now, emotions are really interesting, and we'll talk about that quite a bit throughout this presentation, because your emotions can act as a barometer to indicate where things aren't going as you'd like. So then from our emotions, we can use this as a launching ground into checking out what the thought processes are or the mindsets are that are contributing to our emotions. So for example, if I'm feeling quite anxious, I could ask myself, well, what's going through my head? Why am I feeling quite anxious? Or why am I feeling, really jittery and unnerved? And the thoughts that could be going through my mind are, well, I've got so much work to do this weekend. I don't know where to start. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Then, of course, with that self-talk and that internal dialogue, it's going to contribute to an emotional state that's probably not as positive as we'd like. So you can see here, it all starts with mindset. It all comes down to the quality of our thoughts. Now let me introduce you to some mindsets. Now this isn't an exhaustive list. It just is a list of those mindsets that seem to be more common. Now, the words that you actually see written here aren't necessarily the thoughts that you'd expect to be going through your mind. These are more about the patterns of thinking or the themes around which various thoughts would cluster. So for example, let's have a look at the mindset of control, a person wanting to control how their future unfolds. I'll use an example of an old client that I worked with here. So she only felt calm and confident when she knew exactly how her week and her month were going to unfold, all the tasks that needed to be completed for her projects, and she actually created a whole heap of contingencies just in case. If anything spontaneous showed up for her, that wasn't in the plan, then it would often throw her into a realm of anxiety. So you can see that there's a whole heap of action and emotion that's surrounding that mindset. So she gave me an example of a time when she was building an investment house, and the market was quite flat. But she'd done her homework and she knew that the land that she was building on was next to a business hub, and there's still a great need for rental properties in the area, which absolutely mitigated her risk anyway. She also had a bank loan that was large enough to create a bit of a buffer so that if she didn't rent the property out straight away, she could still afford paying the loan back. She mentioned that when she got to the stage when the build was almost finished and she was negotiating with a real estate agent about finding tenants, she suddenly started getting quite anxious, and the thoughts that were going around in her head, we identified as we were going through a bit of an exercise. There was a whole realm of thoughts that were creating this angst, and some of these thoughts were, what if I can't rent the place out in the time that I need to? What if I don't get the price that I want? What happens if I get tenants who don't pay their rent and cause me troubles? What if I get messed around by my real estate agent like I did with my previous one? Maybe I should just take over the management of this one myself. And the more she thought about the thoughts that circulated in her mind, the more oxygen she gave them, she really started to get herself worked up into a frenzy. So there's a classic indicator there of how your mindsets can trigger the emotional state. Now, there were a number of different thoughts that you would have noticed that were going through her head, and if you look at them, the one thing they had in common was, the desire to be able to control what was going on, and some anxiety around the uncertainty that lay ahead of her. I'll give you another example, and this is a personal example. I definitely used to have the mindset, I'm not adding value unless I'm doing something. Now again, that's not the thought that would be going through my mind. If you were to have a look at what was happening in my life, my diaries were always very full. Even on the weekends, I was jumping from appointment to appointment to catch up, and sometimes I was double booking myself, and I was always on the go, always running. I found it really difficult to slow down and stop, and on the few occasions that I did, I actually felt really guilty. And I'd beat myself up and tell myself that I was lazy and I had to keep pushing through and there wasn't enough time to stop. So you can see there the thoughts that sat behind this mindset. There were quite a few variations of it. Now, if we jump to the outcome and have a look at what happened in the outcome, I mean, obviously I got heaps done and I was really productive. But in the end, because I wasn't taking time to rest and rejuvenate, I basically got burnt out and completely exhausted. So the same goes for each of the other mindsets in this list. Behind each of them, there might be a range of different thoughts that a person may have. And, if you have a look at the common theme that attaches those thoughts together, chances are it would congregate around one of these mindsets. And it's quite possible that you'd have a couple of mindsets running at the same time. So it's not just one mindset that you'd expect to see. You might have a couple of mindsets about any particular activity, and definitely when it comes to different parts of your life, you might find that you've got different mindsets operating in areas. So I often have clients ask me, how do I know when I'm operating from an unproductive mindset? Now I'm going to take you through a process so that you can identify that in a moment. But suffice to say, if ever you find yourself in a thinking trap, then you're definitely operating from an unproductive mindset. So a thinking trap is also known as a cognitive distortion, and it's a distorted version of the world. So we start to skew information and to only take in bits of information which reaffirm our point of view or our argument. And what we do in the process is we leave a whole heap of other information out there, we ignore it, it's untouched, and so we're not getting a complete picture of the world. So let me take you through some examples of this one by one, and as I go through, I want you to try and identify, or I'll get an understanding of whether you do identify with some of these or many of these, and in what situations they play out, and what sort of results you get in your life. I think that's a fantastic opportunity for some self-growth and learning, first of all, through creating that self-awareness. And then once you've identified with it, it's not all doom and gloom. You can actually do something with it. And the key here is just to challenge yourself and challenge the way you're thinking, asking, is this the real version of reality, or is there perhaps another way that I can look at this? So the first one is all or nothing thinking. So with all or nothing thinking, we also know this as black and white thinking. And what you'll find is that individuals will see things as all good or all bad, all right or all wrong, and there won't be much opportunity for middle ground or many shades of grey. So already you can see that this is quite a rigid type of thinking, and you're cutting out plenty of opportunities and options and just narrowing your intake of data to a very specific line of thinking. Catastrophizing is the next one. This is about making mountains out of molehills. I'm sure you probably know someone in your personal life who has a tendency of blowing things out of proportion, making things about all doom and gloom, and creating a lot of angst and drama in the process. This is really seeing things as their worst possible scenario. So again, we're not necessarily allowing ourselves to allow things to play out, to take in all the data. We start to create our own story. And that's what a lot of these are, really. They're just stories that we impose on the world. Overgeneralizing, you can definitely identify when people overgeneralize, and you start to hear language such as always and never. So you'll often notice this in arguments or heated discussions. One person might say, you always let me down, or you're always late, or you're always putting me down, or you never help out, you never listen to me. And my challenging query here would be, really, is it always the case, or is it just sometimes the case, and again you're blowing it out of proportion? If you overgeneralize, you take some very specific scenarios and start to paint the whole world in the same colour, which again is an illusion. It's a distorted version of reality. Jumping to conclusions is about making assumptions about what people are thinking about you, or thinking about their life. We also can make assumptions about how the future will play out. So we're sort of playing the role of mind reader here, just again creating stories when we really don't know how things are going to pan out. Now, jumping into conclusions can be a bit challenging, because it can create anxiety and a whole heap of negative emotion that's not necessarily relevant. And the other thing about jumping to conclusions is that you're filling in the gaps with your own thoughts, so you're not necessarily giving the other person a chance to communicate their intention clearly. Making comparisons, so this is where we create a benchmark for ourselves so that we can measure ourselves against somebody else, their life or them, so we can get an understanding of how we're panning out. So there's two ways of doing this. You can make a comparison with someone who's worse off than you, which is going to give you a bit of a sense of self-inflated ego. Or if you compare yourself to someone who's better off than you, chances are you'll end up feeling quite self-defeated in the process. Well, let's face it, there's always going to be someone who's more attractive, taller, thinner, stronger, richer, more successful than you are. So when you find yourself comparing yourself to others, it's going to end up in pain at some stage. My recommendation here would be, if you really want to benchmark how well you're doing, set some internal benchmarks and then work towards topping those each time. So filtering is where we disregard a whole heap of information and we only choose to listen to or look for specific bits of information which are going to foster our own belief systems. And I guess to a certain degree all the thinking traps are a bit of a filtering mechanism, as I mentioned earlier. And discounting the positives is also a type of filtering. In these situations, we discount the positives and only filter for the negatives. I see this playing out in a couple of scenarios. So in the corporate world, at performance review time, you might notice someone coming out from a discussion with their manager and they've received a whole heap of positive feedback and maybe one morsel of constructive criticism. And they're absolutely shattered, holding on to that morsel of constructive criticism with all their life and disregarding the positives as being insignificant or fluffy. And again, that can really start to create some self-defeating emotions, some depression and just a sense of helplessness. You can also notice this one being played out in life in general, where people might look at their life or their relationship and they constantly hold on to the negative events that have played out without giving much oxygen to those times that have got more positive emotion. And again, that starts to paint the whole relationship or their whole life in a darker shade of grey. Shoulds, musts and ought tos are an individual's expectations about how things should play out. So whether they're rules that they apply to their personal life or rules they apply to how other people should conduct themselves, or how the environment or society should conduct themselves. So there's definitely a mindset here of needing to control. And the thing about shoulds, musts and ought tos is that they're our rules, and who's to say that our rules are the right rules? But as soon as you start having some expectations, you're really opening yourself up to a lot of disappointment if people don't reach those expectations with the level of perfection that you expect of them. Personalising and laying blame are two sides of the coin. So personalising is where you take full responsibility for something that's gone wrong and you make it all your fault. And with laying blame, you actually don't take any of the blame. You're shifting responsibility to somebody else for the terrible things that are happening to you in your life or the way that your life is playing out. So absolutely shirking responsibility. And finally, labelling is an extreme form of all or nothing thinking. With labelling, we take a very specific aspect of maybe a behaviour and then blow it up and apply it to the whole person. So if I was to label myself, I might make a mistake. or say something a bit silly, and then I suddenly, rather than focusing on the behavior, I say, I'm stupid, I'm good for nothing, I'm useless. Similarly, you can label another person if they make a mistake or they do something that's not quite right, you could label them as incompetent or useless. So again, you're blowing up the scenario. So now it's time for you to do some work. I think this is a perfect opportunity to reflect on the information and theory that we've gone through in the last few slides and start to create some practical application. So grab a pen and paper and let's start to have a bit of think about how your life is playing out. So I want you to think of a situation in your life that's currently not working out for you as you'd like it to. So maybe there are some obstacles in the way of you reaching your goals and dreams. If you're not 100% sure about any situation, if you can't recall something, then a great way of zoning into this is to think about, are there any areas in your life where you're experiencing some intense emotion? And as I mentioned earlier, your emotion is often a great indicator for where things aren't going right. So take a couple of moments to create the context and to contextualize the situation, jot down a couple of points about what's happening for you and how you feel about it. So the next thing that I want you to do is to think about the different thoughts that you have around the scenario and maybe the thoughts that precede the emotion or the thoughts that are contributing to the emotion. And once you've jotted those thoughts down, see if you can identify any themes in those thoughts, and that would be your mindsets. So let me give you an example, and I'll stick to the control example that we used earlier. So let's just say I've got a project that I'm working on, it's constantly delayed, it's well and truly broken all deadlines or surpassed all deadlines, and I'm feeling a huge amount of impatience and frustration and irritation around this. So if I ask myself, okay, well, what's going through my head that's contributing me to feel impatient and frustrated and irritated? Some of the thoughts I might jot down are, I can't believe nothing turns out as planned, or why does life have to be so difficult all the time? Or I wish they'd have the decency to get back to me. And you can see here with each of these three thoughts, again, the theme is one of control. So take a moment to create a snapshot of what's going on for you at the moment, and I'll get you to jot down your thoughts and some potential mindsets. And finally, I want you to think about the potential consequences of holding on to those thoughts and mindsets. So what's it costing you at the moment? And if you continue to hold on to them, what's it likely to cost you moving forward? When you become different thoughts and mindsets that arise in your life, especially those that aren't very pleasant, what do you do with them? What's your normal way of dealing with them? Do you push them away and try and get them out of your mind? Or do you sit there, dissect, ruminate, overanalyze, try and work out why you're feeling the way you're feeling, why you deserve the various situations that have popped into your life? Well, actually, neither of those ways is very productive. Neither of them serves us very well. So Swiss psychologist Carl Jung said that what you resist persists. In fact, the more we toy with our mindsets or try to push them away, the more energy we actually give them. The more we embed them into the neural circuitry so that habituated thinking will reappear again and again. That's right, so where attention goes, energy flows, and we end up creating stronger neural pathways in the process. And that's why it's so hard to break behaviours or habits that are not necessarily deemed positive. You spend so much time thinking about what you want to stop doing, and so much time and energy trying to resist the temptations that you actually reinforce the neural pathways in the process. So the easiest way to create a new habit, whether it's behaviour or thinking, is to create a new pathway. So you might feel a bit wobbly to start off with, as you do with any new activity that you learn, but the more you repeat a behaviour, the more you strengthen the pathway and the easier it becomes. As you continue to direct more and more energy and attention to the new habit, the neural pathways become stronger, more embedded, and change becomes easier. The pathways that supported your old habits will also start to disintegrate as energy is being taken away. So we need to stop feeding our old ways of thinking that aren't serving us and instead create a healthier and more productive way of thinking to get better results in our life. And we can do this one mindset at a time. So remember the slide, your thoughts create your mindsets, which then determine the outcomes that you get in life. Well, the benefit of creating a more productive mindset and a more positive stream of thinking is that it's going to put us in a more productive state and we're likely to get better outcomes. We then find that we're in the driver's seat of our own lives just by managing the quality of our thoughts. So let's look back at the mindsets that you identified earlier. I want you to start thinking about an alternative way of thinking. So have a look at the mindsets that you've identified and ask yourself, is there a different way that I can think about this? So you don't need to consider the opposite. You don't need to create affirmations. This is just about stretching your perspective and seeing if there is an alternative way of approaching this that might serve you a little bit better, that might put you in a more positive headspace, that might open up opportunities. And through doing that, we start to shake those ingrained pathways and start to create some new ones. So let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say that I have a mindset of, I need to be right. I hate it when people try and make me wrong. I need to one-up them and I need to be right. Now, that may have a consequence in my life where you start to alienate people. So, there's definitely, I have a vested interest in trying to change that. Perhaps the new way of thinking might be, by letting go, I can let someone else save face and potentially a relationship, and I might learn something in the process. Now, if I've got an old mindset that I'm not good enough or I lack confidence, I might start thinking, if I look realistically at my past, I can see the joy that my services or my product brings others. I've achieved so much and I've got a number of successes in my life. So if I was successful before, I know I can do this now. Here's my old mindset of I'm not adding value unless I'm doing something. An alternative way of thinking might be, if I stop to reflect on my actions, this might provide me with an opportunity for more learning and growth. And then the last mindset is, I am the way I am and I believe it works for me. So this is quite a rigid, arrogant mindset. I don't need to change. And again, that could close off a number of opportunities for you. So an alternative way of thinking that will put us in a more productive state might be, there's always room to grow. Through being flexible, I may open up a whole new world of possibilities and options. So you can see that just by changing the way we think, we could potentially change the results that we get in life. So what I'd like you to do at the moment is to start to identify some new ways of thinking that will create a more positive emotional state for you, that will encourage you to engage in more productive behaviour, and which will end up moving you towards superior outcomes. So with those new mindsets in place, how do you think you might start to feel? And what are some of the activities or behaviours that you might start to engage in? And what sort of possibilities do you think you might create for yourself? So this is a great little activity, doing this through reflection, but the real gold comes from being able to catch ourselves in real time. And that's where we start to get rewiring occurring. So I'd like to show you a 4-step process for rewiring your brain. And that 4-step process is the same process that you'd use to help you get unstuck in any area of your life and move you into success. So step 1 is identifying your mindsets. And you've done that with the initial exercise that we went through. Now the key here is to identify them as they occur from moment to moment during the day. Now there's a number of ways you can do this. For those of you who have a really in tune with your internal dialogue and your self-talk, you might notice that you're starting to obsess over certain thoughts or ruminate and churn on a certain line of thinking. And as soon as you become aware of this, the idea is to take a metaphorical step back, to detach yourself from the emotion and take a bit of a helicopter view where you're being quite objective. Have a look at the thoughts that are going through your mind and see if they fit any pattern. Now, for those of you who are more in tune with what happens in your body, you might notice that there are some emotions or feelings that you're experiencing. Maybe there are some physical sensations in your body, like a tight jaw or a tightness across the chest, maybe some churning in your stomach. And then again, take a step back and ask yourself, what am I feeling and what's contributing to this? So if I've got a churning sensation in my stomach, I might check in and ask myself, okay, what's going on in my head? And if the churning sensation, if I relate that to anxiety, some of the thoughts might be, oh, I don't know how X, Y, and Z is going to play out, or I'm a bit nervous about a conversation that I'm going to have with somebody. So it's all about just detaching from that emotion. The idea then is to start to think about an alternative way of thinking, to put yourself in a more productive state. Now, that's all well and good in theory, but when you're going through this in real time, and when your body is absolutely bathed with a whole heap of emotion, with hormones, with chemicals, when your head's going a million miles an hour, when you feel like you're having a meltdown, it might not necessarily be so easy as to switch your mind from negative to positive. It'd be a lot like driving a car at 100 kilometers an hour and then expecting to shift into reverse in one movement. You can't do it. You need to change through the gears and then slowly move yourself into reverse. And the same process is relevant here. You need to detach from the emotion, you need to calm yourself down, put yourself into a productive state, and then start to think of healthier alternatives. Now, the idea there is you want to switch your attention away from the mindsets that aren't serving you to the mindsets that are serving you. And as you switch your attention, you create a break in the wiring. So you're no longer feeding the wiring that's causing you the angst, and you start to create some new neural pathways through more positive thinking. But how do you do that? How do you switch attention? How do you create that break? Well, there's a couple of different things that I like to do, and it's all about getting out of my head and getting into my body. If I become present with what's going on in my body, then it's very difficult to have, to be ruminating over certain thoughts in my head. You can't be in both places at once. So there's a couple of different activities I do here. One of them is to use the sensations of my body to bring me back into my body. So if I'm walking to a meeting and I'm worried about how things might pan out in the meeting, I have a choice to be in my head, get all anxious about it, and rock up to that meeting in an unproductive state. Or I could take those few moments walking along the corridor to really start to focus in on my body and create a positive state of mind. So as I'm walking along the hallway, there's not a lot that I'm in contact with, but I can feel my feet in contact with the floor. So I would experience or be really conscious of my heel hitting the floor, and the ball of my foot hitting the floor, and then the next foot and the next foot. If I'm sitting down at my desk or in a meeting, and something's triggered me, then I can simply get back into my body and do that through, again, making contact with the floor, but also feeling the pressure of my bottom against the seat that I'm sitting on and my back against the back of the seat. Now, something that I actually like to use a lot more than that is breath. I find breath really useful. So there are two techniques that I use. I do use both of them, just depending on what situation I'm in. With the first one, it's about taking nice, deep, slow breaths through my nose, breathing in, holding for a while, exhaling, holding for a while, and really slowing down the breathing. Not only is that helping you become more present, but because you're engaging in slow, deep breathing, it's also going to be quite calming, which will help you move into a more productive state a lot more quickly. The other breathing exercise that I actually prefer is to be conscious of the movement of air into and out of my nostrils. So this is particularly fun if it's a cooler environment. So as you breathe in, noticing cool air passing into your nostrils, and as I breathe out, experiencing the warm air rush over my nostrils. And I like that one a little bit more because it makes me concentrate that little bit harder. And when I have to concentrate, then it means that I suddenly am no longer hooked by the old line of thinking that was triggering me before. So all you need to do is do this for 6 to 10 seconds, and you'll start to notice a shift inside yourself. And then it's time to consider, okay, well, what's a better way of thinking that's going to get better results for me? And once you've done that, you're in that more positive headspace, and you've got a more broader perspective of the world, you can then decide to take some action that's going to align with your goals and your dreams. Now, this is a really simple process, but look, it's not easy, okay? And it's going to take practice, as anything does, as any new learned skill does. If you're anything like me, there are a couple of places that you'll fall up. And the first one is it's really hard to get into the habit of catching yourself when you're in the midst of, drama and angst or heightened emotion. So, the first 2, 3, or 100 times that I tried to practice this exercise, I noticed that it wasn't till after the fact that I'd kick myself and go, gosh, I just missed it. I missed the opportunity to do something with those mindsets. That's well and good. Don't beat yourself up. The fact that you've caught it a couple of minutes after it's happened or an hour after it's happened, it still means that you have the opportunity of creating some awareness and doing a bit of reflection about how you could have dealt with that situation a little bit better. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. Now, the second area that I found a little bit tricky is when I finally got into the habit of being able to capture my mindsets, I then had to make a choice of whether I wanted to do anything with them. I have to admit, there were times when I knew what was going on. I knew I was running rackets in my mind. I knew I was creating all sorts of drama. But you know what? I just wanted to, wallow in the pool of self-pity, and I didn't have the energy or the inclination to make the change. If that's where you're at, that's well and good. But just remember, every time you continue to humour the old mindset and that old way of thinking, you're preventing yourself from moving on and creating new positive habits. So the quicker you are to disengage from the unproductive thinking and move towards your new thinking, the quicker you're going to create some lasting change. Now, someone once said to me that mastery requires 10,000 hours of practice. So that's essentially 10 years worth of practice to get to elite level or Olympic level of athlete. I want to make a guarantee to you. This is a process that doesn't need for you to practice for 10,000 hours before you get any results. I promise you, I guarantee you that if you just start applying this on a regular basis, on a consistent basis, just making yourself mindful, creating some self-awareness and holding yourself accountable as often as you can remember, you'll start to get some really great changes in a very short amount of time. So we finally made it to the end of the presentation. I recognise it was a lot of information in a short amount of time. But for those of you who are interested in going through the process in a bit more detail, please email me at ebook@eliteedge.com.au and I'll send you my free step-by-step guide on building your full potential using the techniques that we've just gone through. I'd also encourage you to jump onto our learning resources page on our website, which has got a whole heap of other interesting information to help you move forward and tap into your success. So the website for that is www.eliteedge.com.au. So thanks for your time, thanks for participating, and I really hope we get to connect at some stage in the future. If you've got any feedback for me, please shoot that through to the email address provided as well.